Hello and welcome back to Networking 101. I'm Matt Witmer from Brody Precision, and in this video we're going to talk about MAC addresses. So in our previous videos we went through all of the hardware involved with an Ethernet network and specifically talked about the first layer of the OSI model. With the MAC address, we've now moved out of layer 1 and we're into layer 2, the data link layer. VLANs also live in this layer, and we'll talk about those in a later video. So in looking at the software side of things for networking, we're going to focus specifically on this screen, which I'm sure a lot of you watching are probably familiar with. It's the IP configuration screen in Niagara. So if we look at this screen, we've got our physical address listed here in orange. This is our MAC address for our JACE and for this specific interface. So what is a MAC address? MAC address, MAC stands for Media Address Control. It's sometimes referred to as a physical address or a hardware address, as we just saw. It's a unique hexadecimal identifier for a network adapter, and by unique, there's no other adapter that will be created that can connect to an Ethernet network that will have the same MAC address. And the way that works is that the first half of our MAC address, which looks like this, you'll note that if it's a MAC address by the colons that are separating each portion as opposed to the periods that we saw with an IP address, or we will see later with an IP address. So the first half of the MAC address is what's known as an OUI, which is our organizationally unique identifier. That is typically given to the manufacturer of the chip that's used for our network interface card or adapter. And in this case, I pulled this MAC address off of a JACE, and that first half of the MAC address, when you do a lookup on it, it refers to Texas Instruments, and Texas Instruments makes network interface chips. The second half of that MAC address is unique. So it's hexadecimal. Each one of these pieces is hexadecimal, and that second half is unique, specific to that card or that chip itself. So when we combine them all together, this MAC address will never be used by someone else, or an adapter won't plug into a network that will also have this MAC address. So how is a MAC address used? Why do we care about a MAC address? Well, number one, the MAC address is what a switch uses for its basic functionality. So when you plug a device into a switch, the switch will say, hey, what's your MAC address? And then make a note of what the MAC address is and the port that that MAC address is coming in on. So it makes a table of these MAC addresses. And it uses that table to forward traffic to the correct port so it gets to its correct destination. Another piece that comes up a lot, especially when you're working with IT departments, is MAC address filtering. This is a feature that a lot of switches have built in, and IT departments really like to use because it prevents unauthorized devices from plugging into their networks. And the way it works is, when you plug the device into the switch will look at a table, a separate table from what we discussed earlier, and see whether or not that MAC address is allowed to be connected and talking on the network. If it is, it'll let it in, it'll let it talk to all the devices on the network that it needs to. If it's not on that list, the device won't be able to talk to the switch at all. You won't have any network access, you won't have internet access, and that's something that comes up a lot when you're working with an IT department. So it's good to know and have in your back pocket. So that is the basics of MAC addresses. In our next video, we'll talk about IP addresses, subnet masks, and default gateway, and what all those things mean. Thanks.